The howl of the January wind across the New Mexico plains in 1885 carried sounds of suffering that Ryder Yates would never forget. A woman's weak cry piercing through the blizzard like a bullet through silence. He had been riding back to Tucumcari after checking on his small herd of cattle when the storm hit with a fury that seemed intent on burying the entire territory under snow and ice. His horse stamped nervously beneath him as he pulled his coat tighter, squinting through the white curtain that had descended over the landscape. That was when he heard it again, fainter this time, almost swallowed by the wind. Without thinking, Ryder urged his mount toward the sound, trusting his instincts more than his ability to see more than 5 feet ahead. What he found made his blood run colder than the weather ever could. Huddled against an overturned wagon, half buried in snow, was a woman clutching a bundle to her chest. Her lips were blue, her face pale as death itself, and her eyes barely focused as he dismounted and rushed to her side. The bundle moved slightly, and he realized with a jolt that she held an infant wrapped in what looked like every piece of fabric she owned. "Help us," she whispered, her voice so faint he had to lean close to hear it. "Please help us." Ryder did not waste time with questions. He could see the woman was past the point of walking, possibly past the point of surviving if he did not act immediately. The baby was crying, a thin, mewling sound that meant it still had fight left in it. He shrugged out of his heavy coat and wrapped it around both of them, then lifted the woman into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, or perhaps the desperation gave him strength he did not know he possessed. Getting her onto his horse proved challenging, but he managed to position her in the saddle and climbed up behind her, keeping one arm locked around her waist while the other held the reins. The baby remained pressed between them, and he could feel the small body shivering. The ride back to his ranch took twice as long as it should have, the wind fighting him every step of the way. Ryder kept talking to the woman, though he doubted she could hear him, telling her to hold on, that they were almost there, that she and her baby would be safe. She did not respond, her head lolling against his chest, but she never loosened her grip on the child. That alone gave him hope. His ranch was modest, a small house with a barn and some outbuildings, but it had a good stove and a roof that did not leak. He half carried, half dragged the woman inside, kicking the door shut behind them against the wind's protest. The fire in the stove had died down to embers, but he quickly stoked it back to life, adding logs until heat began to fill the single main room. Only then did he turn his full attention to his unexpected guests. The woman had lost consciousness completely. He laid her on his bed, the only bed in the house, and carefully extracted the baby from her arms. The infant was a girl, he saw, perhaps 6 months old, with dark hair plastered to her head and eyes that seemed too large for her tiny face. She had stopped crying but watched him with an intensity that seemed unnatural for one so young. He wrapped her in a dry blanket and placed her in the wooden box he had once used for storing potatoes, padding it with every soft thing he could find. It was not much of a cradle, but it would keep her safe and warm near the stove. Returning to the woman, Ryder assessed the situation with growing concern. Her clothes were soaked through, frozen in places, and he knew he had to get her out of them or risk losing her to pneumonia or worse. He hesitated, aware of the impropriety, but knowing that propriety meant nothing in the face of death. Working quickly and keeping his eyes averted as much as possible, he stripped away the wet garments and dressed her in his own long underwear and a flannel shirt. They hung loose on her thin frame, but they were warm and dry. He piled every blanket he owned on top of her, and then prepared warm water with a bit of salt and sugar dissolved in it, Something his mother had taught him helped with exposure. Getting the liquid into the unconscious woman proved difficult, but he managed to get some down her throat, supporting her head and moving slowly. The baby began to cry again, a stronger sound this time, and he realized she must be hungry. That presented a problem he had no solution for. He had no milk, no way to feed an infant. The best he could do was dip a clean cloth in slightly sweetened water and let the baby suck on it. It was inadequate, but it seemed to calm her somewhat. The night that followed was the longest of Ryder's 26 years. He kept the fire burning hot, monitoring both the woman and the baby, feeling helpless and terrified in equal measure. He had faced down rustlers and survived a winter that killed half his herd, but nothing had prepared him for this, for the weight of 2 lives depending entirely on his actions. The woman's breathing remained shallow, her skin too pale, and several times he thought he had lost her. But each time, she would draw another breath, clinging to life with the same determination she had shown in protecting her child. Dawn came gray and cold, the blizzard still raging outside. The woman's color had improved slightly, and her breathing seemed easier. The baby had finally fallen asleep in her makeshift cradle, exhausted from crying. Ryder made coffee, more for something to do than from any real desire, and tried to think through his options. He needed to get milk for the baby, but the storm made travel to town impossible. His nearest neighbor was old Samuel Pritchard, 3 miles east, but that might as well have been 300 miles in this weather. As if in answer to his thoughts, the woman stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, confusion clouding them before sharpening into panic. She tried to sit up, gasping, and her hand reached out blindly. "Your baby is safe," Ryder said quickly, moving to her side. "She is right here sleeping. You are both safe now." The woman's eyes found him, studied him with an intensity that made him want to look away. They were gray, he noticed, the color of the sky before a storm. Tears welled up in them and spilled over. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Thank you for not leaving us to die." "Could not have done that," Ryder said simply. "No man would." A bitter smile crossed her lips. "You would be surprised what men will do." Before he could respond, the baby woke with a cry that quickly escalated into full-blown wailing. The woman tried to get up, but her legs would not support her. Ryder brought the child to her, watching as the mother's arms closed around her daughter with fierce protectiveness. She tried to feed the baby, but it quickly became apparent that her body, weakened by exposure and starvation, was not producing milk. "How long has it been since you ate?" Ryder asked. The woman looked at him with hollow eyes. 2 days, maybe 3. I lost track after William died." William, Ryder assumed, was her husband. He did not press for details. Instead, he moved to his pantry and began preparing food. He had dried beef, beans, some flour for biscuits, and a jar of preserves his late mother had made. It was not much, but it would help. While the food cooked, he explained the situation with the baby, watching the woman's face crumble as she realized her daughter was starving. "There has to be something," she said desperately. "Please, there has to be something." Ryder thought hard. He knew that goat's milk could substitute for mother's milk, but he had no goat. Then he remembered that the Pritchards kept goats. If the storm would just break, even for an hour, he could make the ride. As if God himself had heard his thoughts, the wind suddenly died down. He looked out the window and saw that while snow still fell, the blinding fury had passed. "I am going to try to reach my neighbor," he told the woman. "They have goats. I can get milk for your daughter." "You cannot go out in this," she protested weakly. "It is too dangerous." "More dangerous to stay and do nothing," Ryder replied, already pulling on his still damp coat. "I know this land. I will be back before the storm picks up again." The ride to the Pritchard place tested every bit of his knowledge of the terrain. He navigated by landmarks barely visible through the snow, trusting his horse's instincts as much as his own. When he finally pounded on the door of the small farmhouse, Martha Pritchard opened it with her rifle in hand, her expression softening when she recognized him. "Ryder Yates, are you mad? Coming out in this weather? Need goat's milk, Martha," he said quickly. "Got a woman and baby at my place, nearly froze to death. Baby is starving." Martha's demeanor changed instantly. She called for her husband and began gathering supplies while Ryder explained what he had found. Within minutes, he had a jug of goat's milk, some eggs, a loaf of bread Martha had baked the day before, and instructions on how to prepare and feed the baby. Martha wanted to come with him, but Samuel refused to let her risk it, and Ryder had to admit the old man was right. The ride back would be hard enough without worrying about another person. He made it home just as the wind began to pick up again, stumbling through the door with his precious cargo. The woman had managed to drag herself to the rocking chair near the fire and sat with the crying baby, tears streaming down her own face. Ryder quickly warmed some of the goat's milk, testing it on his wrist the way Martha had shown him, and then helped the woman figure out how to get the baby to drink from a cloth dipped in the milk. It was messy and inefficient, but eventually, the infant began to swallow. The relief on the mother's face made every moment of the dangerous ride worth it. Over the next few days, a strange sort of household developed. The woman, whose name he learned was Adelaide Murphy, was too weak to do much more than care for her daughter, whom she called Rose. Ryder found himself cooking, cleaning, and tending to both of them, while also managing to care for his animals during brief breaks in the weather. Adelaide told him her story in pieces, revealing that she and her husband, William, had been traveling from Texas to Colorado, where William's brother supposedly had worked for them. William had been sick even before they left, though Adelaide had not known how sick. When his condition worsened on the journey, they had stopped, hoping to reach Tucumcari for a doctor. But William died 2 days before Ryder found them, and Adelaide had been trying to reach town on foot when the full force of the blizzard hit. "I thought we would die," she admitted one evening as Ryder spooned broth into her mouth, insisting she eat even when she said she could not. "I had made peace with it even. I just kept praying that someone would find Rose after I was gone, that someone would care for her." "You are both here now," Ryder said firmly, "and you are going to stay here until you are strong enough to decide what comes next." Adelaide studied him with those storm-gray eyes. "Why are you doing this? You do not know us. We are nothing to you." Ryder set down the bowl and met her gaze. "My mother always said that we are judged not by how we treat those who can repay us, but by how we treat those who cannot. You and Rose needed help. I provided it. It is as simple as that." "Nothing is ever that simple," Adelaide whispered, but she did not argue further. As January gave way to February and the worst of the winter weather began to ease, Adelaide grew stronger. She started helping with small tasks around the house, insisting despite Ryder's protests. He watched her move around his simple home, bringing a sense of order and warmth he had not realized was missing. Rose thrived on the goat's milk, growing plumper and more alert each day. Her smiles became frequent, and Ryder found himself doing ridiculous things to earn them, making faces and sounds that would have embarrassed him if anyone else had been watching. But someone was watching. Adelaide noticed everything, the way he was so gentle with Rose despite his calloused, work-roughened hands, the way he always made sure Adelaide ate before he did, the way he gave up his bed without complaint and slept on the floor near the fire. She noticed, and something in her heart that she thought had died with William began to stir back to life. One evening in late February, after Rose had been put to sleep in the real cradle Ryder had built during the long winter evenings, Adelaide sat with him by the fire. The wind still howled outside, but it no longer carried the killing cold of January. "I need to make plans," she said softly. "Rose and I cannot stay here forever, imposing on your kindness." Ryder felt something twist in his chest. He had known this conversation was coming, had dreaded it even while knowing it was inevitable. "Where will you go?" "I have a sister in Santa Fe," Adelaide said. "We have not spoken in years, but she is family. Perhaps she would take us in until I can find work." "What kind of work?" Ryder asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. Adelaide laughed bitterly. "What kind of work can a widow with a baby do? Laundry, perhaps. Sewing. Maybe I could find a position as a housekeeper where Rose would be tolerated." The thought of Adelaide working herself to exhaustion, struggling to provide for Rose while living on someone else's charity, made Ryder angry in a way he could not fully explain. Before he could think better of it, he spoke. "You could stay here." Adelaide turned to look at him, surprise clear on her face. "Ryder, I cannot just live here. It would not be proper. People would talk." "Then marry me." The words fell into the room like stones into water, creating ripples that spread outward into silence. Ryder could not believe he had said them, but now that they were out, he found he did not want to take them back. Adelaide stared at him as if he had lost his mind. "What did you say?" "Marry me," Ryder repeated, more firmly this time. "I know it is not romantic, and I know you do not love me. But Rose needs a father and you need security. I can provide that. This ranch is not much, but it is paid for, and I make enough to support a family. You would have a home, safety. Rose would have a name and a future." "That is the most unromantic proposal I have ever heard," Adelaide said, but there was no anger in her voice, only something that might have been wonder. "I know," Ryder admitted, "but it is honest. I will not pretend this would be a love match. I am not a smooth talker or a romantic man. But I promise you this. I would be a good husband to you and a good father to Rose. I would never raise my hand to either of you, and I would work every day to provide for you. You would have a say in all decisions about the ranch and the household. Your opinions would matter. And if in time you decided you wanted to leave, if you found you could not stand being married to me, I would give you money to start over somewhere else." Adelaide stood and walked to the window, looking out at the night. Ryder waited, his heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the realization that he desperately wanted her to say yes. When had that happened? When had this pale, thin widow and her tiny daughter become essential to his happiness? "I loved William," Adelaide said quietly. "Not at first. Our marriage was arranged by our families. But over time I grew to love him truly. When he died, I thought I would never feel anything again except the need to survive for Rose's sake." She turned to face Ryder, and in the firelight he could see tears on her cheeks. "But these past weeks, watching you with Rose, seeing your kindness and your strength, I have felt something begin to grow in my heart. I do not know if it is love, not yet, but it could be, given time. And perhaps that is enough to start." "Is that a yes?" Ryder asked, hardly daring to breathe. Adelaide smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes for the first time since he had found her. "That is a yes." They were married 3 weeks later in Tucumcari, with Martha and Samuel Pritchard standing as witnesses. Adelaide wore a simple dress Martha helped her make from fabric Ryder bought at the general store. It was pale blue, the color of the sky after a storm, and Ryder thought she looked beautiful. Rose, now 7 months old and thriving, gurgled happily in Martha's arms during the brief ceremony performed by the circuit preacher who happened to be passing through. The wedding night was awkward, both of them uncertain how to proceed. They had agreed that their marriage would be a true one in all ways, but neither pushed the other. Ryder gave Adelaide time, and she appreciated it more than she could express. They lay in bed together, the first time since her recovery that she had shared it with him rather than insisting he take it while she slept near the fire and simply talked. They talked about their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Ryder told her about his parents, both dead now, and how he had built this ranch from nothing with his father before a horse kicked the old man in the head 3 years back. His mother had followed 6 months later. The doctor said from pneumonia, but Ryder knew it was from a broken heart. Adelaide told him about growing up with a strict father who believed women should be seen and not heard, and a mother too cowed to defend her daughters. She told him about William, who had been kind but weak, unable to stand up to his own father who controlled every aspect of their lives until the old man's death finally freed them. The journey west had been William's idea, his one attempt at independence, and it had killed him. "I will not control you," Ryder promised. "I meant what I said. You are my partner in this, Adelaide. Your voice matters." She reached out in the darkness and found his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "I believe you." Spring came to New Mexico with the sudden glory it always did, the brown landscape exploding into green and flowers appearing where snow had been just weeks before. Adelaide took to ranch life with a determination that surprised Ryder. She learned to milk the goat he had bought from the Pritchards, to tend the chickens he acquired from a neighbor, to manage the garden she planted near the house. She was smart and capable, and she worked without complaint despite the hardness of the life. Rose flourished, growing from an infant into a baby who could sit up on her own and who had started experimenting with solid foods. She adored Ryder, reaching for him the moment he came into view, and he found that being her father filled a hole in his life he had not known existed. He taught her to wave, to clap her hands, to laugh at his silly songs. Adelaide would watch them together, and each time the warmth in her heart grew stronger. It was in May, 3 months after their wedding, that things between Ryder and Adelaide shifted from cordial partnership to something deeper. They had been working together to repair a section of fence that cattle had knocked down, Rose napping in a basket in the shade nearby. Adelaide had insisted on helping despite Ryder's protests, and they worked side by side in companionable silence. At one point, Adelaide lost her balance on the uneven ground and stumbled. Ryder caught her automatically, his hands closing around her waist to steady her. They stood like that for a moment, closer than they had been since their chaste wedding night, and Adelaide looked up into Ryder's sun-browned face. She saw the concern in his blue eyes, the strength in his jaw, the kindness in the lines around his mouth, and she felt it, clear and undeniable. Love. Not the uncertain flutter of possibility, but the solid, real weight of genuine emotion. "Ryder," she said softly. He looked down at her, and something in her expression must have communicated itself because his eyes widened slightly. "Adelaide." Instead of answering, she rose on her toes and kissed him. It was brief and tentative, but it was real. When she pulled back, Ryder stared at her with an expression of wonder. "I am falling in love with you," Adelaide whispered. "Perhaps I have been for a while. I just needed time to recognize it." Ryder's response was to kiss her again, properly this time, with all the feeling he had been holding back for months. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said simply. "I think I started loving you that first night when you protected Rose even when you could barely hold onto consciousness. I have just been waiting for you to be ready." From that day forward, their marriage transformed. They became true partners in every sense, sharing not just work and responsibility but also affection and intimacy. Ryder would reach for Adelaide's hand as they walked, would steal kisses when he thought Rose was not looking, would hold her through the night and whisper his love into her hair. Adelaide bloomed under this treatment, the shadows leaving her eyes and being replaced by genuine happiness. The people of Tucumcari accepted Adelaide and Rose without question. In the West, people understood that life could be hard and that new beginnings were often necessary. At church on Sundays, Adelaide made friends among the other ranch wives, and Rose charmed everyone she met. The general store owner, a kindly man named Mr. Harrison, always had a peppermint stick for Rose when they came to town, and the blacksmith's wife had given Adelaide a set of hair combs that had belonged to her own mother. Summer brought the hard work of haying and maintaining the herd. Ryder taught Adelaide to ride properly, and she proved a natural horsewoman. They would sometimes ride out together in the evenings after the day's work was done, with Rose secured in a sling against Adelaide's chest, and watch the sun set over the endless expanse of prairie. Those were Adelaide's favorite moments, sitting on horseback with her husband beside her, her daughter safe in her arms, and feeling like she was part of something vast and beautiful. In August, Adelaide realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but had not wanted to say anything until she was certain. When she told Ryder, his whoop of joy sent Rose into startled tears, followed immediately by delighted laughter. He picked Adelaide up and spun her around, then set her down carefully as if she were made of glass. "Are you happy?" she asked, even though his reaction had made the answer obvious. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Ryder said, his hands gentle on her still flat stomach. "Another child." "Our child." Adelaide felt a momentary pang at the words, a reminder that Rose was not truly his by blood, but Ryder seemed to sense her thoughts. He pulled her close and said firmly, "Rose is our daughter, Adelaide. Biology does not matter." I was there for her first steps, her first teeth, her first words. I am her father in every way that counts. This new baby will be her brother or sister, and we will love them both equally. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Adelaide felt better than she had when carrying Rose, perhaps because this time she was not traveling in a wagon, not watching her husband slowly die, not starving and desperate. This time she had a home, security, and a husband who treated her like she was precious. Ryder fussed over her constantly, trying to keep her from doing heavy work, but Adelaide refused to be coddled. She knew her limits and stayed within them, but she also knew that ranch work did not stop just because she was expecting. Rose turned 1 year old in September, though Adelaide could only guess at the exact date since she had lost track of time during those terrible days before Ryder found them. They decided to celebrate on September 15th, splitting the difference of when Adelaide thought Rose might have been born. Ryder carved a small wooden horse for Rose, and Adelaide made a cake with precious sugar and eggs. It was a simple celebration, just the three of them, but it was filled with love. As fall progressed and Adelaide's pregnancy became obvious, the reality of their growing family began to sink in. The house was small, just one main room with a sleeping area barely separated from the rest. Ryder began planning an addition, drawing designs in the evening by lamplight and discussing them with Adelaide. They decided on 2 bedrooms, one for the children and one for themselves, with real walls instead of the current curtain that provided minimal privacy. "Can we afford it?" Adelaide asked, practical as always. Ryder showed her the accounts, something he did regularly because he had meant what he said about her being his partner. The ranch was doing well. They had sold cattle in the spring for a good price, and with Adelaide's careful management of their resources, they had money set aside. Not a fortune, but enough for lumber and supplies if they did most of the work themselves. They began the addition in October, working during the cooler parts of the day. Samuel Pritchard came by to help, along with a few other neighbors who believed in the old Western tradition of helping your own. The walls went up slowly but steadily, and Adelaide did what she could, preparing food for the workers and keeping Rose entertained while the men sawed and hammered. By the time the first real cold snap came in November, the addition was roofed and enclosed, though the interior work would have to wait for warmer weather. Adelaide's labor began on a cold night in late February, almost exactly a year after Ryder had proposed to her. Martha Pritchard was staying with them, having arrived 2 weeks earlier to help with the birth. Rose, now walking and getting into everything, was put to bed in her crib in the new bedroom, blissfully unaware that her world was about to expand. The labor was long and difficult. Adelaide had thought carrying Rose was hard, but this was worse. The baby seemed bigger, and Adelaide was exhausted long before the end came. Ryder paced outside, not allowed in the bedroom by Martha's firm orders, listening to Adelaide's cries and feeling helpless. When dawn broke and he heard the sharp wail of an infant, he nearly broke down the door getting inside. Adelaide lay pale and exhausted on the bed, sweat-soaked and weak, but she was smiling. In her arms was a red-faced, angry baby with a shocking amount of dark hair. "A boy," Martha announced proudly. "A big, healthy boy." Ryder approached slowly, overwhelmed by the sight. Adelaide held out the bundle, and he took his son with trembling hands. The baby stopped crying and opened his eyes, dark blue like his father's, and Ryder felt his heart crack open with love. "What shall we name him?" Adelaide asked softly. They had discussed names but never quite settled on one. Looking at his son, Ryder suddenly knew. "Henry," he said. "After my father, Henry William Yates." Adelaide's eyes filled with tears at the inclusion of her first husband's name. It was a generosity she had not expected, an acknowledgement that William had been part of her life and always would be in some small way. "Henry William Yates," she repeated. "It is perfect." Rose met her baby brother the next day, regarding him with suspicion from the safety of her father's arms. She was not impressed with this noisy, squirmy thing that suddenly commanded so much of everyone's attention. But over the following days and weeks, she began to accept Henry's presence, even showing signs of affection by bringing him her toys and patting his head gently when Adelaide held him. The spring of 1886 brought new challenges. Henry was a colicky baby, crying for hours at a time despite all efforts to soothe him. Adelaide, exhausted from sleepless nights, sometimes wept from sheer frustration. Ryder would take the baby and walk the floor with him, singing off key lullabies and talking nonsense, anything to give Adelaide a chance to rest. On more than one occasion, Adelaide woke to find Ryder asleep in the rocking chair with Henry on his chest, both of them finally at peace. By summer, Henry had grown out of the colic and became a cheerful, easy baby. Rose was talking now, calling Ryder Papa and Adelaide Mama, and showing signs of being a clever, strong-willed child. The ranch continued to prosper, and Ryder bought more cattle, expanding their operation. Adelaide's garden flourished under her care, providing them with vegetables and even some surplus to sell in town. One evening in July, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset while Rose played at their feet and Henry dozed in Adelaide's arms, Ryder reached over and took his wife's hand. "Are you happy?" he asked. Adelaide looked at him, this man who had saved her life and given her so much more than she ever thought she would have. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she said honestly. "When you found me in that snowstorm, I was certain my life was over." I had given up on everything except keeping Rose alive long enough for someone to find her. I never thought I would have this. A home, a husband I love, children, a future. I am the lucky one, Ryder insisted. That storm brought me the greatest gift of my life. It brought me you and Rose, and now Henry. This house was empty before you came, Adelaide. I was just existing, not living. You changed everything. They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple. Rose ran to them, demanding to be lifted into her father's lap, and Ryder obliged with a laugh. Adelaide looked at her family, at the child she had borne in desperation, at the son she had created in love, at the husband who had become the center of her world, and she felt a contentment so deep, it was almost painful. The years that followed were not without their difficulties. There were droughts that killed crops and forced them to sell cattle they could not afford to feed. There were injuries, illnesses, and disappointments. Rose broke her arm falling from a fence when she was 4, and Adelaide nearly died from a fever when Henry was 2. There were arguments and hard times and moments when the weight of responsibility seemed too much to bear, but there was also joy. There were summer evenings spent by the creek, teaching the children to fish. There were Christmas mornings with small, precious gifts and laughter around the table. There were nights when Adelaide and Ryder lay together in their bed, hands clasped, talking about their dreams and plans for the future. There were moments when Adelaide looked at her husband and felt overwhelmed by how much she loved him, how he had taken her broken life and helped her build something beautiful from the pieces. Rose grew into a spirited girl with her mother's gray eyes and her own fierce independence. She could ride before she was 6 and shoot before she was 8, though Adelaide worried constantly about her tomboyish ways. Henry was quieter, more thoughtful, but he adored his sister and followed her lead in most things. The two of them were inseparable despite the 17 months between them. When Rose was 7 and Henry was 5, Adelaide discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was harder, perhaps because she was older now, and she spent much of it exhausted and uncomfortable. Ryder worried constantly, but Adelaide assured him that all was well, that this was just how her body handled carrying a child. Their daughter Sarah was born in October of 1889, a tiny thing with blonde hair and blue eyes who looked nothing like either parent, but seemed to be a perfect combination of both families. Rose was enchanted with her baby sister and helped Adelaide care for her with a tenderness that surprised everyone. Henry was less interested but dutifully fetched things when asked and did his best to be quiet when the baby was sleeping. The 1890s brought changes to New Mexico. Tucumcari was growing, the railroad had come through, and there was talk of statehood someday. The wild, lawless days were fading, replaced by churches and schools and proper civilization. Ryder and Adelaide's ranch had grown from a small operation to a thriving spread. They had hired 2 hands to help with the work, built a proper barn, and even put glass in all the windows of their house. Adelaide had become a respected figure in the community, known for her kindness and practicality. She organized quilting bees and church socials, helped new settlers get established, and was always the first to show up with food when someone was sick or had a new baby. Ryder served on the town council and was known as a fair and honest man, someone whose word meant something. Rose started school in Tucumcari, riding into town with her father several days a week. She proved to be a good student, clever and quick, though she still preferred being outside working with the animals to sitting in a classroom. Henry followed a year later, and while he was less enthusiastic about cattle and horses than his sister, he showed an aptitude for numbers that made his father proud. Sarah grew into a sweet, gentle child, content to stay close to her mother and help in the house. She learned to sew and cook with Adelaide, showing a patience for detailed work that neither of her older siblings possessed. Adelaide loved all her children equally but differently, each one unique and precious in their own way. It was Rose who most often asked about her origins. She was smart and had figured out early on that her birthday was a guess, that there were no photographs of her as a tiny infant, that the story of how she became part of the family was different from Sarah's. Adelaide always told her the truth, never hiding the fact that Ryder was not her biological father, but always emphasizing that he was her real father in every way that mattered. "Papa chose us," Rose said once when she was 10, after a boy at school had made a snide comment about her having a different last name at birth. "That makes it more special, doesn't it? He didn't have to love us, but he did." Adelaide hugged her daughter close, tears in her eyes. "Yes, sweetheart. He chose us, and we are so very lucky that he did." Ryder overheard this conversation and found Adelaide later in their bedroom. "Rose is right," he said, pulling his wife into his arms. "I did choose you both. Best decision I ever made. Do you ever regret it?" Adelaide asked, a question that rarely surfaced anymore but still occasionally haunted her. "Taking on a widow and a baby you had no connection to." "Never," Ryder said firmly. "Not once, not for a second. You three are my life, Adelaide. Before I found you, I was just going through the motions. You gave me purpose, family, love. How could I possibly regret that?" As their children grew, Ryder and Adelaide found themselves with more time alone together. Rose was mature for her age and could watch her younger siblings for short periods, giving her parents occasional evenings to themselves. They would sometimes ride out to the ridge overlooking the valley, the place where Ryder had first brought Adelaide when she was strong enough to ride, and sit watching the sunset like they had in the early days of their marriage. "You remember when you proposed?" Adelaide asked one evening when Rose was 14, Henry 12, and Sarah 7. Ryder laughed. "How could I forget? I was terrified you would say no." "I almost did," Adelaide admitted. "It seemed crazy marrying a stranger, but I am so glad I took that chance. You were right about us, Ryder. We work together." "We do more than work together," Ryder corrected, pulling her close. "We love each other. We built a life together. We created a family." Adelaide leaned into him, comfortable and content. "I never thought I could be this happy. When I was huddled against that wagon, freezing and desperate, I had no hope. And then you appeared out of the storm like an angel. A very confused, freezing angel who had no idea what he was getting himself into," Ryder said with a smile. "But I would do it again in a heartbeat. I would find you in 1,000 storms, Adelaide. Every time." The turn of the century brought reflection. Ryder was 41 now, Adelaide 38. Rose was 15 and beautiful, already drawing attention from young men, much to Ryder's dismay. Henry at 13 was shooting up in height and showing signs of becoming as tall as his father. Sarah at 10 was still their baby, though she was growing more independent each day. They held a party at the ranch on New Year's Day 1900, inviting neighbors and friends to celebrate the new century. Martha and Samuel Pritchard were there, both white-haired now but still spry. The two ranch hands, Miguel and his son Carlos, joined the celebration with their families. The house was full of laughter and music and hope for the future. As midnight had approached the night before, Ryder had pulled Adelaide outside onto the porch, away from the noise of the children trying to stay awake to see the new century arrive. 15 years, he said softly. 15 years since I found you and Rose. Best 15 years of my life, Adelaide replied, wrapping her arms around his waist. Thank you for saving us, Ryder. Thank you for giving us a home and a family and love. "Thank you for saying yes," Ryder countered. "Thank you for taking a chance on a cowboy who had no idea how to be a husband or a father. Thank you for making this house a home." They kissed as the old century gave way to the new, surrounded by the sounds of their children and friends celebrating inside, under the vast New Mexico sky that had witnessed their entire journey together. Rose eventually married a young rancher named Thomas Riley when she was 19. Ryder walked her down the aisle with tears in his eyes, remembering the tiny baby he had held that first terrifying night. Thomas was a good man, hardworking and honest, and he loved Rose with the kind of devotion that reminded Adelaide of Ryder. They settled on a ranch 20 miles away, close enough for regular visits but far enough to establish their own life. Henry decided he wanted to go to college, a decision that surprised everyone but made his parents proud. He went to the Territorial University in Albuquerque and studied business, with plans to return and help run the ranch with modern techniques. Ryder, who had learned ranching through hard work and experience, was amazed at all the new ideas his son brought home during school breaks. Sarah showed no interest in leaving. She loved the ranch and declared at 12 that she would never live anywhere else. Adelaide smiled at her daughter's certainty, remembering how she herself had fallen in love with this place and never wanted to leave. The ranch continued to prosper through careful management and hard work. Ryder and Adelaide made decisions together, as they always had, their partnership as strong as ever. They added to their herd, improved their facilities, and eventually bought out a neighboring ranch when the owner decided to move back east. They celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary in 1905 with a party almost as large as their New Year's celebration had been. The entire community came, a testament to how respected and loved the Yates family had become. Ryder gave Adelaide a beautiful necklace he had ordered from a catalog, garnets set in silver, and she cried when she opened the box. "You did not need to spend so much," she protested even as she clasped it around her neck. "You are worth more than all the garnets in the world," Ryder replied. "I just wanted to give you something that would remind you how much I love you." That night, alone in their bedroom after all the guests had left and the children were asleep, Adelaide looked at herself in the mirror. She was 50 now, her dark hair streaked with gray, lines around her eyes and mouth from years of sun and smiles. She looked at the woman she had become and barely recognized the desperate, half-dead widow Ryder had found in the snow 20 years before. Ryder came up behind her and rested his hands on her shoulders, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "You are as beautiful now as the day I married you," he said softly. "You are a terrible liar," Adelaide said with a laugh, "but I love you for it." "I am not lying," Ryder insisted. "You are beautiful, Adelaide, not despite the years, but because of them. Every line on your face represents a smile, a laugh, a moment of joy. Every gray hair is a battle won, a challenge overcome. You are beautiful because you are you, and I will love you until the day I die and beyond." Adelaide turned in his arms and kissed him, this man who had changed her entire life with a simple act of kindness 20 years ago. They had been through so much together, built so much, created so much. Their love had grown from tentative beginnings into something strong and unshakable, a foundation upon which their entire lives were built. Rose had her first child in 1906, a boy she and Thomas named Ryder after his grandfather. When Adelaide held her grandson for the first time, she wept with joy. Ryder stood beside her, his own eyes damp, looking at this new generation with wonder. "We did this," Adelaide whispered. "We created all of this." "You did this," Ryder corrected. "You survived when you should have died. You had the courage to take a chance on me. You built this family with your strength and your love." "We built it together," Adelaide insisted, as she always did when Ryder tried to give her all the credit. "Everything we have, everything we are, we built together." Henry graduated from university in 1907 and returned home full of plans to modernize the ranch. Ryder listened to his son's ideas with a mixture of pride and bemusement, eventually agreeing to try some of Henry's new methods. To Ryder's surprise, many of them worked, increasing efficiency and profits. Father and son became true partners in running the ranch, combining Ryder's experience with Henry's education. Sarah at 18 was courted by several young men, but she seemed in no hurry to marry. She was happy at home, helping her mother manage the household and working on her own projects. She had started raising chickens for egg production and had built up a small but profitable business selling eggs and chickens to people in town. Adelaide admired her daughter's independence and business sense, seeing in Sarah a reflection of her own resilience. In 1908, Henry married a girl from Tucumcari named Elizabeth Grant, and they settled in a house Ryder, and Adelaide helped them build on the ranch property. The family was expanding, roots growing deeper, and Adelaide felt blessed beyond measure. She had gone from a woman with nothing, who expected to die in a snowstorm, to a matriarch of a thriving family with children and now grandchildren. Ryder at 49 was showing his age, his hair more gray than brown, his face deeply lined from years in the sun. But he was still strong, still capable of a full day's work, and still looked at Adelaide with love in his eyes every single day. Their marriage had long since moved beyond the practical partnership it began as. They were best friends, lovers, confidants, and partners in every sense of the word. One evening in the spring of 1909, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset as they had done countless times before, Adelaide took Ryder's hand. "You ever think about that day?" she asked. "The day you found us?" "Often," Ryder admitted. "Especially in winter when the wind howls. I think about how close I came to riding past, to never hearing you, how different my life would be if I had been on a different path that day." "I think about it too," Adelaide said softly. "I think about how I had given up, how I was just waiting to die, and then you appeared. You saved my life, Ryder, not just that day, but every day since. You gave me a reason to live, to hope, to love again." "You saved me too," Ryder replied. "I was so lonely before you came. I did not realize how lonely until suddenly I was not anymore. You and Rose filled my house with life, with purpose. And then came Henry and Sarah, and our life has been so rich, so full. I cannot imagine having missed any of it." They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching the New Mexico sky put on its nightly show of colors. From inside the house came the sounds of Elizabeth preparing dinner, and Henry arguing good-naturedly with Sarah about something. Normal, everyday sounds that represented everything Adelaide and Ryder had built together. Rose brought young Ryder and her new baby daughter Catherine to visit frequently, and the house once again filled with the sounds of small children. Adelaide delighted in being a grandmother, spoiling her grandchildren in ways she had never been able to spoil her own children. Ryder carved toys for them like he had once carved toys for Rose, his hands still steady despite the arthritis that was beginning to creep into his joints. Sarah finally married in 1910, at age 21, to a neighboring rancher's son named Patrick Morrison. Unlike Rose, Sarah did not move away. She and Patrick built a house on the far edge of the ranch property and became part of the operation, Patrick working alongside Ryder and Henry, while Sarah continued her chicken business and helped Adelaide with the ever-expanding family gatherings. The years flowed past like water, each one bringing changes but maintaining the core of family and love that Ryder and Adelaide had established. There were difficult times, seasons when the rains did not come and they had to carefully manage resources. There was the time Henry nearly died from appendicitis and had to be rushed to Santa Fe for surgery. There was the heartbreak when Rose had a miscarriage between her second and third children. There were the normal trials and tribulations of life, faced together with faith and determination. But there was so much more joy than sorrow. There were grandchildren, eventually 5 of them, filling the ranch with laughter and chaos. There were anniversaries and birthdays and holidays, celebrated with the entire extended family, gathered around tables that groaned under the weight of Adelaide's cooking. There were quiet moments when Ryder and Adelaide could sneak away to their ridge and remember the early days, marveling at how far they had come. In 1915, they celebrated 30 years of marriage. The party was enormous, with people coming from all over the territory to celebrate with them. Rose and Thomas were there with their 3 children. Henry and Elizabeth brought their 2 boys. Sarah and Patrick had their new baby daughter. The ranch was full of family and friends, all there to honor the couple who had become pillars of their community. Someone asked Adelaide to share the story of how she and Ryder met, and she stood before the assembled crowd and told it, not sparing the difficult details, but focusing on the miracle of Ryder finding them, of his kindness, of how he had given her and Rose a home and a family. "I was a stranger to him," Adelaide said, her voice strong despite her 62 years. "Just a woman freezing in a snowstorm with a baby. He could have ridden past. He could have done the minimum and left us in town, but he did not. He brought us into his home and into his heart. He made us his family, not because he had to, but because that is who he is. Everything you see here, all of this, grew from that one act of kindness on a winter day 30 years ago." There was not a dry eye in the crowd, and Ryder stood to pull Adelaide into his arms, not caring who saw them embrace. "Best decision I ever made," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Finding you and Rose was God's gift to me, and I thank him for it every day." The applause was thunderous and the celebration continued long into the night. But eventually, as always, it was just Ryder and Adelaide, alone in their bedroom, reflecting on their journey. 30 years, Adelaide marveled. "It seems impossible that it has been so long." "And yet not long enough," Ryder replied. "I want 30 more years with you, 60 more, however many we can have." They both knew they would not have 60 more years. They were aging, their bodies wearing down from decades of hard work and hard living. But they also knew that they had been blessed with something precious, a love that had grown from the ashes of tragedy into something beautiful and enduring. Rose's oldest child, young Ryder, started helping on the ranch when he turned 15, learning from his grandfather and uncle the same way they had learned from those before them. The cycle continued, each generation building on what the last had established. The ranch that Ryder's father had started and that Ryder had built with Adelaide's help would continue long after they were gone, maintained by their children and grandchildren. In the spring of 1920, Ryder fell ill with pneumonia. It hit him hard, and for weeks, Adelaide sat by his bedside, willing him to live the way he had once willed her to live. Their children came home, gathering around their father's bed, holding vigil. But Ryder was strong and he recovered, though he never quite regained all his strength. At 61, he was finally forced to admit he could not do everything himself anymore. He turned more responsibility over to Henry and Patrick, accepting his new role as advisor rather than primary operator. Adelaide at 67 was also slowing down, though she refused to admit it. She still maintained her garden, still cooked for family gatherings, still managed the household. But she tired more easily now, and there were days when her joints ached so badly she could barely move. On those days, Ryder would sit with her, the two of them talking about old times, about memories they had accumulated over their 35 years together. "You remember when I first proposed?" Ryder asked one day as they sat on the porch, watching yet another sunset. "How could I forget?" Adelaide replied with a smile. "It was the least romantic proposal in the history of marriage. And yet you said yes," Ryder pointed out. "Because I saw the man you were," Adelaide said. "I saw kindness and strength and honesty. I saw someone I could build a life with, and I was right." "We built a good life," Ryder agreed. "A very good life." They sat in comfortable silence, old companions who no longer needed words to communicate. Their hands were clasped as always, weathered and spotted with age but still fitting together perfectly. Rose brought them flowers from her garden. Henry checked on them daily, making sure they had everything they needed. Sarah cooked meals and brought them over, insisting her parents needed to eat properly. The grandchildren visited constantly, filling the house with youthful energy that both exhausted and delighted their grandparents. In the summer of 1922, they celebrated their 37th wedding anniversary quietly, just family this time. There was a cake and presents and laughter, but it was intimate rather than elaborate. Adelaide was 70 now, Ryder 63, and they were content with simple pleasures. That evening, after everyone had left and they were preparing for bed, Adelaide looked at her husband and smiled. 37 years, she said. "You have put up with me for 37 years." "Easiest years of my life," Ryder replied, helping her into bed with gentle hands. "Every day with you has been a gift, Adelaide." He climbed in beside her, and they lay together as they had for so many years, hands clasped, hearts beating in rhythm. Adelaide thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment, from desperate widow to beloved wife and mother and grandmother. She thought about the children she had raised, the life she had built, the love she had found in the most unexpected way. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Ryder replied. "Always have, always will." The years continued to pass, each one more precious than the last. They celebrated Rose's 40th birthday and young Ryder's 21st. They attended Henry's 15-year wedding anniversary and helped Sarah celebrate when her chicken business expanded to include a partnership with a hotel in Santa Fe. They watched their grandchildren grow and begin to find their own paths in life. In 1924, Ryder and Adelaide celebrated their 39th wedding anniversary. Ryder was 65 now and looked every year of it. The pneumonia had weakened his lungs and he tired easily. But his mind was sharp, and his love for Adelaide burned as brightly as ever. He still walked her to their ridge when weather permitted, still held her hand, still told her he loved her every single day. Adelaide at 71 was frailer than she wanted to admit. Her joints pained her constantly, and she had trouble with her eyesight. But she could still tend her small herb garden near the house, could still bake the cookies her grandchildren loved, could still sit with Ryder on the porch and watch the sunset. One evening in late summer, as the heat of the day faded into pleasant coolness, they sat on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. The sky was putting on a particularly spectacular show, all golds and pinks and purples. "Beautiful," Adelaide murmured. "Yes, you are," Ryder replied, as he always did when she commented on the sunsets. Adelaide laughed softly. "After all these years, you still have not learned the difference between me and the sky." "I learned long ago," Ryder said seriously. "The sky is beautiful for a moment." "You are beautiful forever." They sat in comfortable silence, watching darkness fall over the land they loved. Inside the house, they could hear Sarah and Elizabeth preparing dinner, could hear the grandchildren laughing and playing. The sounds of family, of home, of a life well lived. "Do you have any regrets?" Adelaide asked suddenly. Ryder thought about it, really thought about it. "No," he said finally. "Not one. Every choice I made, every path I took led me to you and this life. How could I regret any of it, not even the hard parts?" Adelaide pressed. "The years when the ranch barely made enough to survive. The droughts and the illnesses and all the struggles, especially not those," Ryder replied firmly. "Those are what proved we could handle anything together. Those are what made us stronger. Adelaide, every moment with you, good or bad, has been worth it. I would not change a single second." Adelaide felt tears well up in her eyes. After nearly 40 years, this man could still move her to tears with his words. "I love you so much," she whispered. "And I love you," Ryder replied. "From that first night when you whispered, 'Help us,' I was yours. I just did not know it yet." They stayed on the porch until the stars came out, until Sarah came to call them in for dinner, until the night wrapped around them like a comfortable blanket. When they finally went inside, they moved slowly but together, as they had done everything for 40 years. That winter was mild, allowing Ryder and Adelaide to enjoy the season without too much discomfort. Christmas was a joyous affair with all their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch. The house was crowded and noisy and wonderful. Adelaide looked around at all the people descended from her, at the family that had grown from such desperate beginnings, and felt overwhelming gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered to Ryder as they watched their grandchildren play with their new toys on Christmas morning. "For what?" he asked. "For everything," Adelaide replied. "For finding us, for saving us, for loving us, for giving me this family and this life. For making me happier than I ever thought possible." Ryder pulled her close, not caring that they were surrounded by people. "You made me just as happy," he said. "We saved each other, Adelaide. We built this together." Spring came in 1925 with the usual burst of green and flowers. Ryder and Adelaide celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary in March. The entire community came to honor them, 4 decades together representing something rare and precious. They renewed their vows at the church in Tucumcari, with all their children and grandchildren as witnesses. When the preacher asked if Ryder would love and cherish Adelaide, Ryder replied in a strong voice, "I have loved and cherished her for 40 years, and I will continue to do so until I draw my last breath and beyond." When Adelaide was asked the same, she looked at Ryder with tears streaming down her face and said, "This man saved my life and made it worth living. I will love him forever." There was not a dry eye in the church. The celebration afterward was magnificent, with food and music and dancing. Even Ryder and Adelaide took a slow turn around the dance floor, moving carefully but joyfully, lost in each other's eyes. That night, exhausted but happy, they lay in their bed and reflected on the milestone they had reached. 40 years, Adelaide said in wonder. "When I said yes to your proposal, I hoped we might have a good life together. But I never imagined it would be like this. I never imagined being this happy." "I did," Ryder admitted. "From that first moment when you woke up and looked at me with those gray eyes, I knew. I knew you were going to be the most important person in my life. I knew whatever happened, we would face it together. And I was right." They talked late into the night, reminiscing about their journey. They talked about Rose as a baby, about building the house addition, about the births of Henry and Sarah. They talked about the hard times and the good times, about the laughter and the tears, about all the moments that had woven together to create the tapestry of their life. "If you could go back," Adelaide asked as sleep began to claim them. "Would you change anything?" "Not one thing," Ryder murmured. "Except maybe I would tell myself to propose to you sooner. I wasted weeks working up the courage." Adelaide smiled in the darkness. "It was perfect timing," she assured him. "Everything happened exactly as it was supposed to." They fell asleep hand in hand, hearts full of gratitude for the life they had built and the love they had found in the most unexpected way. Outside their window, the New Mexico night was clear and bright with stars, the same stars that had witnessed their entire journey together, from desperate beginning to joyful present. The months that followed were peaceful. Ryder's health remained stable, and Adelaide felt better than she had in years. They spent their days on the porch, in the garden, with their family, enjoying the simple pleasures that had always sustained them. Young Ryder, now 20, was clearly being groomed to eventually take over the ranch, and both Ryder and Adelaide delighted in teaching their grandson everything they knew. In the fall, Rose announced that she was going to be a grandmother herself. Her oldest daughter Catherine was expecting, which would make Ryder and Adelaide great-grandparents. The news filled them with wonder at how time had passed and how their family had grown. 4 generations, Adelaide marveled. From me nearly dying in a snowstorm to 4 generations of family. It is almost impossible to believe. Nothing is impossible with love, Ryder replied, putting his arm around her shoulders. We proved that. As winter approached, bringing with it memories of that fateful storm 40 years ago, Ryder and Adelaide found themselves often discussing that day. They had told the story many times over the years, but now they explored it more deeply, talking about what they had felt and thought, about how close they had come to never meeting. "I almost rode a different direction that day," Ryder admitted one evening. "I almost went south instead of west. If I had, I never would have heard you." "But you did not," Adelaide said firmly. "You went west. You heard me. You saved us. That is what matters, not what might have been, but what was and what is." January of 1926 came cold and harsh, but not as terrible as that January 41 years earlier. Ryder was 67 now and feeling every year. His breathing was often labored, and he spent more time resting than he wanted to admit. But he was still present, still engaged with his family, still in love with his wife. On January 15th, the approximate date when Ryder had found Adelaide and Rose all those years ago, they held a small family dinner to commemorate the event. It had become a tradition over the years, a day to remember and give thanks for the miracle that had brought them together. 41 years ago today, Ryder said, raising his glass of cider, I found the greatest treasure of my life. To Adelaide and Rose, who made me a husband and a father and taught me what it means to truly live. To Ryder, Adelaide countered, raising her own glass with a trembling hand, who appeared out of a storm like an answer to prayer and gave us everything. We would have died without him, but instead, we lived and loved and built this beautiful family. We are blessed beyond measure. The entire family toasted. 3 generations gathered around the table, all there because one man had chosen compassion over convenience 41 years earlier. That night, alone in their room, Ryder held Adelaide close. I am so glad I found you, he whispered. I am so glad I whispered help us, Adelaide replied. I am so glad you heard me. I am so glad for every moment we have had together. They fell asleep in each other's arms, 2 people who had found unexpected love and built something beautiful from desperate circumstances. Outside, the New Mexico wind howled, but inside they were warm and safe, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived and a love that had conquered everything. Spring came again, as it always did, bringing renewal and hope. Ryder's health had deteriorated over the winter, but he refused to be bedridden. He still insisted on his daily walk to the porch, still wanted to see the sunset, still needed to feel Adelaide's hand in his. His children and grandchildren visited constantly, filling the house with life and love. In April, Rose's granddaughter was born, making Ryder and Adelaide great-grandparents for the first time. The baby was named Adelaide Rose, and when they brought her to meet her great-grandparents, Adelaide wept with joy. Ryder held the tiny infant with practiced hands, marveling at how life continued, how their family tree kept growing. "We started this," he said to Adelaide, wonder in his voice. "All of this came from us." "From you," Adelaide corrected gently. "You were the beginning. Your kindness, your compassion, your willingness to help a stranger, that is where all of this started. We built it together," Ryder insisted, as he always did. "Everything we have, we created together." As spring turned to summer, Ryder grew weaker. The doctors said his lungs were failing, the damage from the pneumonia years earlier finally catching up with him. He bore it with the same quiet strength he had shown his entire life, never complaining, focusing instead on the blessings he had received. On a warm evening in June, as the sun set in glorious shades of gold and red, Ryder and Adelaide sat on their porch for what would be the last time. The whole family was there, sensing somehow that this was important, that they needed to be present. The grandchildren played quietly nearby while Rose, Henry, and Sarah stayed close to their parents. "Beautiful," Adelaide whispered, watching the sunset. "Yes, you are," Ryder replied automatically, then smiled. "One last time, I needed to say it one last time." Adelaide clutched his hand tighter, tears streaming down her face. "Do not talk like that." "Adelaide," Ryder said gently, turning to look at her. Even after 41 years, his blue eyes still held that same love, that same devotion. "I want you to know that every single day with you has been a gift. From the moment I heard your voice in that storm to right now, sitting here with you and our family, every moment has been precious. I have no regrets, no sadness, only gratitude." "I cannot lose you," Adelaide sobbed. "I cannot do this without you." "You will not have to," Ryder assured her. "I will always be with you. In the house we built, in the children we raised, in every sunset we watched together. I will always be with you, Adelaide. Death cannot separate us, not really. What we have is eternal." He pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder as they watched the sun disappear below the horizon. Their children gathered around them, and for a long moment, they simply existed together, a family bound by love and sacrifice, and the courage of two people who had found each other in the darkest of moments. Ryder passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 nights later, with Adelaide lying beside him, her hand clasped in his. He was 67 years old and had lived a full, rich life. The funeral was attended by what seemed like the entire territory, a testament to how many lives he had touched. Adelaide stood at his graveside in the small cemetery outside Tucumcari, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-granddaughter, and spoke the truth of her heart. "Ryder Yates saved my life 41 years ago," she said, her voice surprisingly strong. "But he did more than that. He gave me a reason to live. He loved me when I thought I could never be loved again. He chose my daughter and made her his own. He built a life with me, a partnership based on respect and trust and deep, abiding love. He was the best man I have ever known, and I am honored to have been his wife." She lived another 3 years, staying in the house she and Ryder had built, surrounded by family. Rose moved back home to care for her mother, bringing things full circle. Adelaide spent her days telling stories about Ryder, ensuring that her grandchildren and great-grandchildren knew what kind of man he had been, what he had done for her and Rose. how he had given them everything. On a cold January evening in 1929, 44 years almost to the day after Ryder had found her freezing in that snowstorm, Adelaide passed away peacefully with Rose holding her hand. She was 76 years old and had lived to see her family grow to encompass 3 generations with a 4th on the way. At her funeral, Rose stood before the assembled crowd and told the story one final time, the story of how a cowboy found a freezing widow and baby, how they whispered, "Help us," and he made them his family forever. She told it with tears streaming down her face, but also with joy, because the story was not one of tragedy but of triumph. It was a story of love conquering despair, of kindness creating miracles, of 2 people who had built something beautiful together against all odds. "My mother used to say that she and Ryder saved each other," Rose concluded. "And I think she was right. They each gave the other a reason to truly live. They created a family built on love and respect and partnership. Everything we have, everyone here, exists because of them." Because on one cold January day, a good man chose compassion over convenience. Because a desperate woman had the courage to ask for help. Because they both chose love. Ryder and Adelaide were buried side by side in the Tucumcari Cemetery, their graves marked with simple headstones that bore their names and dates in a single line. Together forever in love. Their ranch was passed down through the generations, maintained by their descendants who never forgot the story of how it all began. The house they built still stood, added onto and modernized, but fundamentally the same. The ridge where they had sat and watched countless sunsets became a place of pilgrimage for their descendants, a place to feel close to the couple who had started it all. Years passed, then decades, but the story lived on. It was told at family gatherings and passed down from grandmother to grandchild. It became part of the family lore, the foundation upon which everything else was built. The story of the cowboy and the widow, of desperation and salvation, of love that grew from the most unlikely circumstances into something that lasted not just a lifetime but generations. And on cold January nights, when the wind howled across the New Mexico plains, descendants of Ryder and Adelaide would look out at the darkness and remember. They would remember the storm that brought 2 souls together, the whispered plea for help that changed everything, the man who chose kindness and the woman who chose hope. They would remember that love can grow anywhere, even in the frozen heart of winter, and that the most profound gifts often come in the most unexpected ways. The legacy of Ryder and Adelaide Yates was not just in the land they left behind or the wealth they accumulated. It was in the love they shared, the family they created, and the truth they proved. That one act of compassion can ripple through time, creating waves that touch lives for generations. They had taken a moment of desperation and transformed it into a lifetime of love, and in doing so, had created something truly eternal. Their story became a beacon of hope, proof that even in the darkest moments, help can come from unexpected places. That love can bloom in the most unlikely circumstances. That family is not just about blood but about choice and commitment and showing up every single day. That 2 people, working together with respect and love and determination, can build something that will outlast them both. And so the story ended not with an ending at all, but with continuation, with great-grandchildren who carried the names Ryder and Adelaide, with a ranch that still operated under the Yates name, with descendants who looked at pictures of a stern-faced cowboy and a gentle-eyed woman, and knew that they owed their very existence to a frozen moment in time when desperation met compassion and created a miracle. The wind still blew across the New Mexico plains. The sunsets still painted the sky in impossible colors. And the love that Ryder and Adelaide had built together still lived on, carried forward in the hearts and lives of everyone they had touched. Everyone who had been blessed to be part of the family they created from nothing but need and kindness and love. It was a love story for the ages, simple and profound, a testament to the power of choosing love even when everything else said to walk away. And it would be remembered and retold as long as there were Yates descendants to tell it, a reminder that the greatest adventures often begin with the simplest words. Help us.